Good afternoon, folks. My name is John Everest. If I'm looking a little ruffled, it's because I've just run across town from delivering training. And so my apologies, I missed Lee's presentation this morning, but I have read her book. So feel that I can make some comments from that perspective, at least. It actually strikes me, moving between the worlds, moving from a training room with a bunch of very, very enthusiastic and skilled people moving into the area of restorative justice, that actually we're talking here about some high skill activity here and some really good people that are putting their hands up to do this work. And I guess for me, I found myself struggling to accept the notion that this should be something that we should therefore do for cheap, in the sense within a community sense. I think frankly that's insulting to the skills and the commitment that people bring to this work. This is not a personal plea, but it's actually what we're requiring of people all over the country to do this work. And, you know, as an example, you know, I did a full training day on Monday. I then got in the car, drove up the coast to Paraparam and ran a restorative justice conference. By the time I got back to Wellington, it was something, and debriefed, it was something like 11:30 at night. So that's the reality here that we're actually talking about. And I think for me, I don't think we should be accepting that if we're expecting high standards of our facilitators. In terms of my journey into this area, you'll gather immediately from the accent, not from these shores. My journey started as a police officer in the UK, and I'm ashamed, at least somewhat embarrassed to admit that our approach to family violence at that stage, we turn up at a domestic, we make sure things are dampened down, and if you're feeling that way in the morning, love, come down the station. Whether that was a formal policy or not, I'm not fully sure, but it was certainly the implied policy. Roll on a few years and arriving in New Zealand, I don't know whether it was marrying and having 3 daughters, but I found myself being drawn to working in the stopping violence area, thinking that what we've been doing as police officers wasn't wonderfully useful and insightful, and certainly wasn't making much of a difference in terms of change. And I learned a huge amount, starting at a very personal level. I went in then to show these chaps what to do, and actually discovered that actually what I needed to do was self-reflect first on my own sort of behaviours, actually. And so I'm actually really thankful that my wife Heidi bore with me through that period of self-reflection. But you know, it also it took me a while to get where the DV sector was coming from, and I think I probably did a lot of growing up in that process. And at the same time, I became incredibly frustrated that there seemed to be a rule which said, "Thou shalt never bring 2 parties together." We have men's programs, we have women's programs, but thou shalt never bring them together. And yet we'd be sitting there teaching safety plans and so on. So, for instance, a time-out night. And at the end of the night, the advice was, well, now go home and have that conversation with your partner. It's the TUI-ad, right? Yeah, right. I mean, who in their right mind would then go home, if your partner's and things are sweet, why would you raise it? The next time there's a crisis, why the heck would she ever listen to you? And so I guess for me, whether, you know, restorative approaches, whatever our goals, even if we're simply sitting there trying to negotiate and work out a decent safety plan going forward, for me it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. The question for me is much more about how we do this well, and how we really do it well, and how we really start making a difference. I note from reading Lee's work, and it's one that I support, that a central tenet of that is that there's not one size fits all. And certainly the US research absolutely shows that. 10 years of mandatory arrests, and what it had done, well, it had made it significantly safer for white middle-class women and significantly more unsafe for black women and women of color, because of the knock-on effects of that. So I totally agree that we need to have a sort of a flexible system. So for me, I'm not when I'm going on to now is to talk about a system. I'm not talking about rigidity, but it seems to me that a good system has multiple outlets, multiple exit and entry points, lots of flexibility to adapt to meet the needs of people, real people, family, whānau that might be coming into the system. And I guess at the moment, it feels like we've kind of had a good idea. Oh, RJ might be helpful, and we'll sort of lob a bit of funding at that because it's promising. But actually, there's been no deconstruction of the ridiculous system on which it sits. And therefore, actually, we're kind of battling that whole thing the whole time. So, for instance, the case we went to the other night, that was addressing an act of violence that happened back in August last year. It's taken that long to get it through the system, to get to the point where we were sitting in a drafty kind of hall with a couple of people having a conversation. So when we talk about resourcing, actually this is not about us saying we want more money for this. Actually what we're saying is we want to be supported in getting this right and doing it properly. For me, in terms of the way, and this is not meant as an insult, and forgive me for being direct, it's rare to get the opportunity of a public stage to be able to say these things. But it seems to me that we lack a strategic vision of what we're trying to do about this. And I'm not talking about lots of policy work and so on, but where are we trying to get to? Where does this fit within the overall system? At the moment, and I can only comment on my personal experience in Wellington, it feels to me like the judiciary, is kind of sometimes at their wits' end, and someone please give us a clue, something that will help us deal with this family in crisis. RJ, that's something new, that's got some promise, we'll give it to you guys. And the trouble is that's kind of then detached from the rest of the system. So the family has been involved with perhaps SIFs, they've perhaps been involved with the doctor, the family, the fan, there's a whole heap of people have been involved. And yet, the very much the junior player in the whole system, the NGO, the community volunteer sector, is then up trying to marshal government departments, whether it be police officers, social workers, or whatever, doctors, to, hey, please, can we join this stuff up? And absolutely, at the moment, there isn't a system. It's not joined up. And actually, from a provider perspective, actually, it feels like, come on, you guys, we've given you some rules. Now you design the system for us. I'm sorry, that's absurd. It's just not good enough. If we're really committed to restorative justice, let's think about it. Let's start doing it properly. Let's make sure that actually we are connecting up the information that's already in the system. In Wellington, for instance, it's taken us so long to be getting the information, and this is not an implied criticism of police, but to get the information coming through from police out of the arrest file. So that takes ages to get. Now, actually, it's unsafe and unprofessional, whether volunteer sector or not, to be going into that sort of situation without all the information. We know SIFs have been involved, but where's the connections between the NGOs that are delivering this work and the formal agencies, so that we can actually get that information in a timely fashion to deliver good service? Now, it seems to me, looking at some of the work of the likes of Kay Pranis, she talks about having the wider circle and getting the right people in that circle, in whatever the context that might be. At the moment, it's like herding cats. It's almost impossible. There's a whole DV sector there, and at the moment, it feels like we're just bypassing them, rather than building on the straws and the resources and the information and the experience that's already there. Actually, we need to be coming together and cooperating on that. So my apologies if this sounds impassioned, but it really feels to me that we shouldn't be sitting here in any way in a congratulatory tone. We actually need to be saying, what the heck are we going to do to actually do this properly and do it well? Because at the moment, actually, with the floodgates opened under the new Sentencing Act, but mark my words, things are going to go wrong. And then RJ will be kicked out. It was the flavor, oh, that doesn't work. And it's not because it's not good, it's because it's not being supported properly. Thank you.